Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TriComB2B's webinar, 5 New Principles of SEO. I'm Caitlin Krause, and I'm today with Andrew Humphrey, our digital marketing manager and in-house SEO expert. Andrew, hello, it's good to be here with you today.
Hey, Caitlin, it's good to be here with you too, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us. This is going to be a lot of fun.
So Andrew, before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit why search engine marketing is so important right now?
Sure. It's a great question. Search engine marketing is so important right now because think about just how important search engines are in your daily life, right? If you're like me, there's a really good chance you're going to Google multiple times a day for whatever issues you may be having, right? It could be something as simple as, man, I just can't figure out what I want to order for dinner tonight, to something as complicated as like a business-to-business problem, right? Take this into consideration, for example, according to Demand Gen, a research group, they found that in a recent survey, over 60% of B2B decision makers start their research journey on Google. So everybody's going to it for problems, and we need to be prepared.
It definitely sounds like something that's really relevant, especially right now when someone's going to search for, a solution to their problems. Before we get started today, I just wanted to point out a few things about the Blue Jeans platform. We've reserved some time at the end of the presentation to have a question-answer session. So if you have any SEO questions or something you'd like to discuss with Andrew, please post it in the chat and then we'll get to it at the end. All right, Andrew, feel free to get started.
Great. Okay, I believe I should be sharing my screen now. Caitlin, can you confirm if the first slide is up?
We're still waiting on the first slide. Might need to switch screens.
Give that one more whirl. Now, I'll try it one more time.
Yep, we're good to go. So whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Caitlin. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us today for our webinar. The focus of today's discussion is on search engine optimization, i.e. SEO, and 5 really important principles to build a successful program out of it. I've been active in this space for a little over 13 years now, and truthfully, over that time, I've kind of fallen in love with SEO. It really is, in my mind, the coolest. There's so many exciting things about it. It's constantly changing for very good reasons and keeping me on my toes. And we're going to get into a lot of how it's been changing for the better in this webinar today. Something else that I've learned over my 13 years of working in SEO that kind of bums me out is honestly how much of a nerd apparently I am for loving it so much. I'm not worried about being a nerd. I actually embrace that role quite a bit. What bums me out is when people say to me that SEO is just something they can't understand. Maybe they describe it as being overly technical or even a little bit intimidating. My hope with today's webinar, if you find yourself in that camp, that you can actually walk away feeling a little empowered to not only understand how SEO works, but why it's so important and can drive real business results. So with that being said, let's dive right in. Okay, so just like any other marketing channel or strategy you might be wanting to embark upon, it can be hugely helpful to have some grounded philosophical framework to help inform your decision-making along the way. And in SEO, it's no different. You are going to be making tons of decisions, whether it's about your content, about your best practices you might want to incorporate, etc. So before we get into these 5 principles that help structure a successful SEO program, let's try to come up with a common philosophical framework first to guide us along the way. Number 1, and this is going to be a really important recurring theme throughout this presentation. Do not think of Google or even its algorithm as some sort of mystical entity. Something I commonly hear from folks that are getting frustrated with SEO sounds a little like this, right? It's, oh man, I can't figure out what it takes to appease the Google gods out there, I'm always trying these new best practices. I'm trying new things on my website. Nothing seems to appease the Google gods. I can appreciate that to a point. There's a ton of misinformation out there on the web of quote unquote best practices as far as SEO goes. And that can be very confusing. Fortunately for us, Google is actually very transparent about what they want to see us doing and why. You just kind of need to know where to look for those answers, and we'll be talking about some of that today. So what does guide Google's decision making? It's actually not a mystical thing. It's quite simple, really. Google, at the end of the day, is just a business, and their algorithm is just a product. That's not to say that their algorithm isn't a hugely impressive product. It absolutely is, but it's just a product, right? They're trying to provide a good customer experience. Where their customers, it's you, it's me, it's anybody who's turning to Google for a solution to whatever problem they have. And Google is great at this. They're great at being just a business, right? It's why they currently control something like 90% of the search engine market share out there. Not because they're keeping us guessing or keeping us on our toes. It's because they're just being an awesome business with a really great product. One of the ways that they're doing this, they're delivering this great product, is because they're focusing on the individual user. And as SEO experts, we need to be doing the same. Today's SEO is all about the individual user. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a hypothetical thing here for a minute. I'd like you to think back to how you might have searched for something that you needed, say, 15 years ago. Now, if you're like me and you needed something like shoes, very possible you were searching in a very primitive manner, perhaps reluctantly, right? You might have just searched for something as simple as shoes. And as a result, you had to fight through all sorts of garbage results, right? Maybe you were sifting through pages that talked about the history of manufacturing shoes or literary references and fairy tales about shoes, like, right? Things that really don't matter to you, that weren't relevant to what you came to Google for in the first place. Now, if you're also like me, hopefully as time progressed to get you to present day, you've kind of learned to grow with Google a little bit. And you've learned that the more specific that you can be with the questions you give Google, the more specific it will be with the answers it gives back to you. So now I'm not searching shoes anymore. Maybe I'm searching for something really specific, like vegan leather alternative tap dancing shoes in Dayton, Ohio. Hypothetical, don't, too much judgment in my personal life, right? So we all search in these ways though, right? We've learned to really expect a lot out of Google. So I've learned to be really specific in my search terms and I'll get specific answers, but we've also learned that we want a quality experience out of that, right? So if I am searching for vegan tap dancing shoes, it better be the best dang website that talks about vegan tap dancing shoes. It's helpful to think about this sometimes not necessarily as a B2B marketer or even a marketer, just somebody who uses the internet. Like, what do you hope is going to happen when you reach a web page, right? Google's looking for the same things and trying to provide those same kinds of experiences. That website you click on, it needs to be easy to navigate. So if I'm looking for tap dancing shoes, maybe I want to search by color or size or price or whatever it is. And I need to be able to do that seamlessly without getting lost in the weeds. Further, if I'm so inspired by those vegan tap dancing shoes that I want to shout it out to the world around me on social media or in my email, I can do it without getting interrupted. And ultimately, it needs to be optimized for my device of choice, not the content creators, right? A lot of times in the content marketing landscape, we have this opposite thinking where we are trying to control how users will receive our information. It really needs to be the other way around, where they get to tell us how they're consuming information, and everything we're offering is optimized on that, whether that's mobile, desktop, a tablet, or watch, or whatever it's going to be. Because of all of this personalization, everything's becoming so specific now. It's nearly impossible to predict exactly how an individual is going to search for something. I give that example, the vegan leather alternative tap dancing shoes in Dayton, Ohio. It's a little hyperbolic, it's a little silly, I get that. But what I'm getting at here is how unpredictable that could actually be, right? There's 9 different words in that phrase. We have a couple of different nouns, a couple adjectives, a conjunction, etc. If you consider all of the complexities and beautiful nuances of the English language, you could easily render millions of alternative phrases that have virtually the same intent for something like that. And if you're having a little trouble scaling that in your head, here's something to chew on for a second. Google receives, on average, over 70,000 searches per second, right? That's just how big that scale is. It's about 6 to 7 billion searches per day. What's further mind-blowing to really drive this point home about giving up the idea, out of those 70,000 plus searches, 15% are from phrases Google has literally never seen before, right? Because again, we're all thinking very specifically, and we know that Google's going to give us specific results. So As marketers, we need to let go of thinking we know exactly how someone's going to search for something. We don't. Instead, we need to figure out what's driving the intent behind those searches and making sure that our content that we're developing can accommodate those users along that way. Now, Google is updating its algorithm every single day to stay as sharp as possible. There's an expression in Silicon Valley, if you're not constantly innovating, you're becoming obsolete. And Google's completely aware that that's the reality that they exist in. You guys remember MySpace, right? And what happened to them? A couple missteps along the way and not paying attention to this entity called Facebook happening right behind them. Boom, no more MySpace. Now Facebook controls everything. Google is very aware that one misstep along the way, Bing, Yahoo, or maybe Jeeves is going to make his comeback and steal all the search activity from them, right? They're trying to stay on the front edge of everyone's behavior. All these different major algorithmic changes that have happened over the years, they may sound scary or mystical. They're not, right? These are very practical things that they've done to stay competitive. Take, for example, 2015, that dreaded Mobilegeddon that everybody talked about, right? Ooh, that's a scary name. No, it's a very practical thing that they learned that year. That was the first year that Google learned that more searches were officially happening on mobile devices than on desktop. What are they going to do as a company? Are they going to keep rewarding desktop? No, they're not going to tell people how to search. They understood that mobile websites should be preferred over desktop. Simple thing that keeps them competitive as a company. Furthermore, Google looks at over 200 ranking factors to determine what websites it wants to prioritize. And that's a lot to consider, certainly. But if you want to know what they care about the most, fortunately, Google has provided us an answer to that. So there's this guy. His name's John Mueller. He works for Google. He's worked on their algorithm, right? And he also acts as a liaison between Google and the SEO community. When he was asked back in 2017, so just to put a timestamp on this is over 3 years old information. When he was asked what the most important ranking factor of a website is today in Google's eyes, his answer was awesomeness. Simple enough, right? Now, that's an intentionally vague answer, but that's kind of the point, right? He doesn't want us fixating on tiny little things like, oh, how many times do you use a keyword or how many words are on a page? No, they want us to focus on providing the most awesome content we can. Now, this can come across as frustratingly vague news, depending on how you look at it. A lot of old school SEO marketers out there are used to very prescribed ways of doing things, right? Here's a page you want to write. Needs to have at least 1,000 words, and you need to repeat your keyword 20 times for it to work. We're way past that time. We've been past that time since even earlier than 2017. I choose to find this not frustrating, but actually pretty inspiring, that I don't need to fixate on those tiny little details anymore. Instead, I need to really consider what my customers are thinking and what I'm doing to facilitate their research journey. Ultimately, this means we really need to rethink what SEO is at its core because a lot of it has changed. Number one, we need to prioritize the user experience at all costs over any quote-unquote best practice, right? There are tons of bad best practice ideas out there that you will be confronted with that you need to learn to ignore. Think about it this way. If what's being proposed to you is going to hinder your brand's reputability or someone's trust in you, that's terrible marketing and you should never, ever do it, right? It's also bad SEO. It's truthfully not going to help you out in the long run. Furthermore, as we have also discussed, we need to kind of let go of keywords, not entirely. They still certainly have their place, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. But we need to think about more the intent behind those different keywords and what they bring from a value perspective. So thank you for sitting through my philosophical rant. Like all inspired marketers, we want to know not just about the philosophy, but what we can actually do about it. And that's where our 5 principles of SEO success come into play here. And we're going to be talking a little bit about each one of these sections, but in a nutshell, think about SEO as 5 different steps, right? Number 1, we need to work on earning rankings. Obviously you need to be visible in Google for reasons we've already discussed. People are turning to them to solutions. We need to make sure that we're actively appearing. But it's not enough just to get a ranking. We need to get clicks, right? Otherwise, we're not going to be even close to moving the needle from a business perspective. But clicks aren't even enough anymore. Truthfully, in today's era, clicks are a pretty unimpressive benchmark to hang your hat on. We need to think about what we're ultimately doing to engage users when they get to our website. We talked earlier about how Google is constantly updating their algorithm to stay competitive. We need to think in the same way. Number 4, we need to constantly update our technical performance to be leading edge, the top of the line website experience. Number 5, finally, thinking about the future of the internet, right? It's going to be changing a lot, and so too will Google, and so too should we. What are we doing to embrace that future, and what alternative listings might actually look like for us? It's a quick overview. Let's start talking about some fun stuff here. Number 1, earning rankings. Before I go down a rabbit hole, and I tend to do that sometimes, it's important to think about what rankings actually are so we're on the same page, right? Let's get that nomenclature calibration in place. What is a ranking? It's a pretty simple thing, right? You're looking at it right over here on the right. A ranking is the list, any order we give for a given keyword. So all the different websites that show up. This can include paid listings, right? You see all these over here with the word ad indicated right next to it. Those are your quote unquote pay-per-click rankings. But then there are the organic rankings as well that are really the focus of this particular webinar. Google has sworn up and down, you cannot pay to influence those results. We have to earn our way in there through good SEO tactics. That's cool and all, but how do you actually earn rankings? It's a very fair question. Let's get into that. The most important thing you can focus on if you want to have good rankings is to build your reputation as a company online and offline. I know it sounds like horrible advice to be giving where I'm just telling you be a good company, but it really does matter quite a bit. One of the biggest SEO indicators out there of awesomeness is simply being a name users trust. Now, the reason I bring this up again is because I keep coming back to this idea of quote unquote best practices, right? Anything that hinder the user's trust should be avoided. I don't care who said it. You need to always be protecting your brand, number 1, because that's what marketing is at its core. And SEO is just one kind of marketing. But without thinking about your reputation exclusively, what are some actionable things, maybe some smaller scale stuff that we actually can focus on? I'd like you to think about your content, right? There's this ongoing, ethos in content marketing that content is king. Absolutely true. I like to think of content itself or my website, whatever experience I'm trying to build, kind of like a boat, honestly, and the sail or the boat perhaps, but the keywords that I'm including to help that or the best practices that I am incorporating are not the boat, but rather maybe just a little push of wind to keep that boat moving forward. Like anything else, right? If I put too much wind, it's very possible I can tip that boat over, and that's bad news bears for everybody, right? We're just trying to give a nice, tactful way to keep our content moving down that water. Now, if you ever had an SEO plan delivered to you, or perhaps you have worked on yourself, this probably looks a little familiar to you, and it's still worth engaging in these kinds of activities. We call this page level SEO sometimes. These are places you can basically add a meaningful little gust of wind. Maybe it's to your title tag, your URL, your page copy, whatever. These are very obvious places both search engine spiders and users are going to look to understand what a page is about. So it's helpful to have keywords in there to set that context. But again, none of this is the boat, right? The content and the experience, that's what we're talking about here. So how do you build that boat? Number 1, focus on writing naturally. This was a huge update that Google announced in November 2019, that they're trying to work more on understanding the intention, not just behind their users' queries, but also the content of a page. Again, we're all moving away from exact keywords. Google's very much trying to move away from that space, so natural language is what they want us to work on. Now, again, this is kind of frustrating for a lot of old SEO experts because you don't have the typical prescribed template anymore to make a page be successful, right? We can't just say, write a 1,000-page essay that uses the same keyword 20 times to work. We need to think subjectively here. And because of that, there is no greater tool you're going to have at your disposal than a good copywriter, because they're always asking those subjective questions about the goodness of writing, right? So things that they commonly will be asking themselves with every page are things like, would I want to read this? Now, I don't care if you're writing about the tiniest little screw and the most giant piece of mechanical equipment in a warehouse. If you're writing a page about that screw, do it passionately, right? Make sure that when you walk away from it, it's something you think is just really good and you're really proud of that you would want to read yourself. Further, is it thorough enough to answer any questions somebody might have, even if it's about that tiny little screw, right? If you think that it's too short to be able to do that, you might need to beef some stuff up there. It might need to be padded with a little bit more meaningful conversation about whatever that subject may entail. How does it stand out from similar pages on the web, right? This is especially important for websites that are entering the marketplace for the first time. You can't just put the same content out and expect to rank. You need to put your own spin on it. This is where thought leadership is hugely important, right? Because you're putting out unique perspectives that incentivize Google to rank you over somebody else who has a generic answer about it. Is it easy to read, or is it being bogged down with some kind of technical jargon? That can be challenging in B2B, certainly, but it's one of the beautiful things about that kind of marketing tactic is that we're taking complicated things and trying to make them simplistic. This can also be very true, though, for B2C marketing as well. Whatever you're doing, it needs to be written in a way that's not just so insidery. It needs to be universally understood. And finally, is it free of typos, grammatical errors? It seems like an obvious one to call out, but sadly, it's kind of not. You've probably run into this in your own life. I've seen plenty of professional websites out there that have grammar errors all over it. Besides that just looking terrible, because it is terrible, I like to get back to the idea again of intent being really important here. Grammar is a very important thing because it is an instruction for how you're supposed to interpret a given sentence, right? All those complexities of the English language, every comma, every period, they all have different meanings in them. So without those in place, you can walk away from the same sentence with multiple meanings. Intent is hugely important, and that's part of writing naturally. So too is telling your story, again, that thought leadership, unique perspective that you have on a subject and doing it routinely and regularly. Think about it like a garden, right? You can't make a whole garden come to fruition if you just put a couple of seeds on. So too is the case with pages you're building. Literally every page you publish can be viewed as a chance to grow your organic presence. That big garden is going to grow the more that you're putting out into the world. Writing regularly further incentivizes Google to check on your website routinely for new content, right? There's this myth out there that Google will update you and your index maybe every 6 months. That's not true. If you teach Google that you are a good content creator, they might come back every day to see what you're up to. It matters a lot because you could be putting out new content that they can give back to their customers, their searchers, right? You've probably heard that blogging can be an effective way to do this, and it's definitely true. Blogging is a great tool still for SEO for these reasons. It gives you a bit more free form of a platform to routinely put out content out there and to update the world about what you're thinking about things, what news they need to be attuned to, what kind of thought leadership perspective you're taking around you. Okay, so I've been talking about earning rankings. Is there anything that hurts rankings? And absolutely, we should know about these as well. Some things you need to avoid. Number one is treating your content or your keywords like a game of Mad Libs. This drives me nuts. I still see this happening all the time with old SEO experts, quote unquote. You might remember this game when you were a kid where everybody gets the exact same little story or copy, right? There's just a few gaps you have to fill, and all these wacky results come out as a result of it, right? That's not what we should be doing in SEO, where we just have this boilerplate copy that we buy or we generically slap together and then just sprinkle some keywords and call it a day. It's way more complicated than that for a good reason. That's not to say that keywords don't have their place. They definitely do. I like to think about keywords as a way more informative tool, right? Maybe it's to identify some new topics that I want to write about. Keyword research can be hugely beneficial in doing that. Keywords can help guide copywriting, not instruct them. Again, it's just your content you're building a little bit more wind. It's to help guide that ship, not change the boat itself. They can be used to inform your web architecture. So say you learn from your keyword research, hey, product A has a ton more search interest out there than product B. Well, you probably want to make sure product A is a lot more pronounced on your website. You can learn what users are asking, right? Maybe it's a very specific question that you can flesh out in an FAQ section of your website. Keyword research is great for that. And last but not least, forecasting your web audience size, right? Just knowing if you have a market to go after for a given subject. This is where I see keywords as being useful as opposed to that traditional just slapping them in a page and expecting search results or even worse, business results to happen. They won't. Further, treating word count as a content strategy. So, my buddy here, John Mueller, we talked about him earlier where he said awesomeness is the biggest ranking factor. He gets asked constantly, what's the perfect amount of words we should have on a page to rank in SEO? And he said time and time again, as have other key figures at Google, word count is not a ranking factor. Save yourself the trouble. That's not to say that pages can be, blank of any copy whatsoever. They need to be thoroughly written, but we need to let go of any kind of arbitrary number in our mind. Like maybe you've heard 1,000 words or you don't rank. It's not like that. It's about the quality of your content. If you want a practical example of what bad word count strategy looks like, I turn to, unfortunately, the recipe. So, this COVID era of self-isolation, I, like many boring people from the Midwest, have turned my boredom into baking. And here's an example of a page that is supposed to give me a very simple recipe that ended up giving me 1,400 words on a recipe that only contains 6 ingredients. Why would you do that, right? That's such a long, rambly page that doesn't get to the core of what I came to it in the first place. Like, I can appreciate you wanting to talk about the first time you baked brownies with grandpa and, oh, the dew on the morning grass dripped down like beads of glass, whatever. That stuff does not matter, right? I came here for a recipe. Where is it? A lot of these websites tend to do this now too, where they've got this jump to recipe button included on there. My question becomes, if you know that's what I came here for, why all this, right? Like, why not just get me to what I came for in the first place? Why not just provide me the best recipe you possibly can? The reason is because I think people are trying to hit these arbitrary word counts. They're worried about not showing up. Instead, what they're doing is they're making me not care, basically. We avoid it. Just like the self-fulfilling prophecy that we should avoid, that my customers aren't on mobile. Something I hear a lot from people, especially those with a, say a reporting process in place is, I can see it in my Google Analytics report. Nobody on our website gets here through mobile, so that's why I haven't cared about it. That's a bit of the snake kind of eating its own tail phenomenon, right? Just because nobody's showing up on mobile doesn't say it's because they don't want to. They just might not be able to because you haven't put enough effort into it yet. So that's number one. You might be losing some very meaningful traffic from mobile users. Further, you might actually be hurting your desktop experience too. In Google's mind, all of these different devices are part of the same experience. It's just extensions of them, right? So if I'm not at my home on my computer desk, I'm looking up this information somewhere else on my cell phone. They want to make sure that it's available no matter what the device is. And if you're not sure if your website is up to code for mobile performance, after this webinar, we're going to shoot you over these slides, and it includes a link to this really nifty tool from Google. It's mobile-friendly test. You simply put your URL into a bar, it'll digest your content really briefly and give you a little bit of a report card about things you can focus on to improve your web performance there for mobile. Let's quickly recap everything we talked about on earning rankings. Best thing you can do is to build your reputation online and offline. That's why we need to be very cautious and skeptical of best practices when they're approached to us, because if there's anything that's proposed that's going to hurt your reputation, you should avoid it at all costs. Keywords are great in guiding your content, like, right, it's the wind of your boat, but it's not the boat yourself. Don't tip it over by stuffing too many in. Right, naturally, do it often. Your leadership in your space can be a hugely impactful way to demonstrate that you are an authority and worth being followed by Google and by web users. And again, don't neglect your mobile experience. It's just too important. So that was all number one. The rest of these sections, I promise you, will be a little bit quicker moving. But the first one really is a tough one to overcome. That's earning your rankings, right? So now we're going to move into encouraging clicks. So say you have accomplished that first step. You are now regularly ranking for your targeted keywords. Congratulations. But that's just one part of a much larger equation. We still need to figure out how to make sure we are, beating the competition, so to speak, for those coveted clicks. The biggest ways to do that is to remember everything that's facing a user in a search engine result page is just an ad at the end of the day. There are obviously ads that you can pay for through pay-per-click advertising. That's all cool and all. And then there are also these ads that we're focusing on today. These are the ads you earn, but remember, they're still ads, right? A lot of times these fields, these are called title tags and meta descriptions that make up your little advertisement that appears in search results. A lot of times these are just kind of slapped together, and there's not a lot of attention paid into what purpose they even serve, right? And that can have a lot of missed opportunities on the table. Case in point, a strongly crafted, high-ranking listing can achieve a click-through rate of 35% or higher. As a practical example there, what we're talking about is, say a keyword typically drives about 1,000 searches per month. That means one of those many competing websites can easily earn 350 or more clicks per month off of it. Huge. That can be a very big impact on your bottom line one day. So what does a good ad in a search engine result page look like, even if we're not paying for that ad placement, but rather earning it through SEO? There's a couple different things we can look to. Number one, Does it represent the brand, right? I keep coming back to this, but it keeps getting skipped in SEO, and I don't understand. Trust is so important in any kind of marketing context. Your brand should never be underpronounced. It should always be up front and center for them to understand. Keep in mind, too, beyond the click, every time you show up, that's brand awareness opportunity, right? So why would you neglect something that important? Beyond just brand representation, keyword inclusion can be a really beneficial thing. Number one, you're able to show up for a given keyword by doing this, but you also get a little bit of a visual advantage over your competition here because keywords can appear bolded in your little ad. That's a really big indicator for encouraging click-throughs as well. Last but not least, setting the tone for what's going to happen when somebody actually reaches your website from this ad, right? You're setting the tone in this particular case that you want them to contact you. That's a really important thing to put in their heads, that there is sort of another step beyond even the click here that we want to encourage. Maybe you want to offer some kind of, I don't know, feature or something. Maybe it's a free quote. Maybe it's a buy one, get one. These are all great places to feature that as well. And this is not a one and done deal. You can update these elements routinely, especially if you have new deals or new products that you want to highlight. Tiny little improvements may seem arbitrary, but they're not. They can have really tremendous impacts on your bottom line, even if you're just leveraging the existing impressions that you currently are working with. A little math example to demonstrate this point. So say you have a keyword, fill in your own mind whatever keyword it is. Maybe you have 1,000 searches per month attached to it, right? And you're showing up regularly. That's cool, but maybe your click-through rate is not as strong as you want it to be. Currently, let's say it's at about 10%. That means every single month that one individual keyword, whatever it is consistently driving about 100 visits to your website. Take that a step further and think about what happens when they get to that website, right? Maybe you want them to fill out a form, and that's your conversion you've identified for that page. It's about 1% of your visiting pool. In other words, out of that one keyword every month, at the end of the funnel, you're getting about one quote-unquote conversion. Again, not bad for one keyword. But let's say we're able to leverage these existing impressions and get better click activity out of them. We're not even talking about earning new rankings. We're just working within our existing impressions. They were able to raise that click-through rate from 10% to 35%, all things being equal. By the end of the year, you'll have earned 3,000 additional web visits and 30 or more conversions. That's a huge potential for your business, especially in the B2B space, if one conversion can mean potentially a $100,000 to $1 million contract, right? Imagine what you were able to do if you could do this with 100 keywords. Now you can kind of see this is a big incremental gains game in SEO, but a lot of times this step is skipped and you miss out on opportunities. You put money on the table, you kind of walk away from. Which brings us to another step here about engaging users. Let's say we've gone through the first two steps here. We've earned rankings and we're generating good clicks. Now what? Well, now's the time to define what you actually want your users to do when they get to your website and encourage those actions to take place. We talked about how our copywriters can be one of the best assets when it comes to natural language, right? And they are. So too is the case for your creative team. And this is why offering the best possible page design you can be really impactful. Obviously, a well-designed page can guide a user to take those actions we have defined, whether that is filling out a form, filling out a shopping cart, watching a video, whatever it is that is of value to you. They're going to help your users understand and take those actions. They can minimize copy and clutter in a page in a way that can really facilitate natural language to blossom. They can also walk that line of load time and design eligibility, right? It's a dance that we always kind of have to consider, like what's the most exciting website we can build that doesn't take 3 days to load, right? A good creative team is going to be able to help you walk that line to make those decisions. And ultimately, good design in any context, and SEO is really no different, really does help build trust in your users. Case in point, so we spent actually a lot of time putting together this webinar here to make sure that it looks as good as possible, right? Because we want you to trust what I'm saying is true, right? So big shout out to Mike Bell and Lauren Murphy for making this presentation look as awesome as it does. We really want to make sure this looks authoritative, right? So you know what I'm saying is true. Here are some examples of some good page designs out there on the web. Number one, we got this Quantum Group website. You get like a vibe, a little bit of an attitude about it, just looking at some of these snapshot examples. There's this sense of vastness, this bigness, right? You're oftentimes hovering over a world around you. There are these great little creative marketing snippets kind of included where they need to be, like in this bottom left-hand corner, we invest in residential property with passion, right? It's putting out a feeling out there more than anything else. We at TriComB2B talk a lot about the importance of emotion in your marketing. Here's a great example of that. There's so much emotion that's happening here to guide that content experience. Minimal copy, granted, but a group like this, like the Quantum Group, can get away with that to a degree. They're an established brand. They have a wonderful website, and they're just providing the minimum copy that needs to get the story told properly. Same with Apple. Their iPhone web pages are just a lot of fun to click around on. Everything's interactive here. But how frustrating is it when you get to a website and there's something that looks like you should be able to click on it and then you do and nothing happens? That is not the case in the iPhone store. It's a highly interactive, very dynamic website, very 2.0 version of the user experience. And there's even less copy on this website than there was in the Quantum Group, right? Because you take the reputability of a brand like Apple, combined with the awesome power of their UX experience, and now you might not even need copy that much to be able to get you to that awesomeness factor that John Mueller, Google, and all of our customers are looking for at the end of the day. Architecture is hugely important in this regard too. What are we doing to make sure that we're navigating these users along the way? This is especially important in a high consideration marketplace like B2B tends to be. It's very unlikely anybody is going to arrive on your website from organic search and convert right away. A lot of times this can take 15 to even 20 steps, depending on how complicated that buyer's consideration may be. And we don't want to restrict that. We just want to make sure no one's getting lost while they're trying to make those decisions. And whenever they are ready to take an action, we're accommodating that possibility. We're making it very clear that whenever they're ready to become a customer, we're ready to sell to them, basically. Continuing that idea that there is no magical thing happening in SEO, I am oftentimes asked, what does the perfect architecture look like for ultimate SEO performance? There isn't one, honestly. Everything comes down to your customers and understanding how they think and how they shop. That is the perfect architecture as far as SEO is concerned. It's just good marketing practices. Moving on to number 4, enhancing technical performance. Let's say we've knocked out all 3 of those first steps. We are earning those rankings, we are encouraging those clicks, and we are engaging those users. What can we do to make sure that we're keeping those good times rolling? Well, now it's time to make sure we are constantly and closely monitoring our website's health and improving our website's technical performance. So just like Google has to constantly update its algorithm to adapt to changes in the search engine landscape, we need to be sure that we're doing the same thing. As the internet evolves, as user behavior evolves, what are we doing with our website to make sure we're accommodating those changes in a good way? Perhaps you've heard of technical SEO as a term that's thrown around and maybe you have no idea what it means. It's a pretty simple concept, really. You can think of it like training for the Olympics. If we're keeping all things equal, technical SEO literally means whoever comes in just a half second sooner than the rest of the competition is going to get that gold medal. And so we're working on making sure that our website is as snappy and quick and clean rendering as possible. So just like your copywriters are your biggest asset for natural language, and your creative team is your biggest asset for your page design, this is where your marketing technology team can really be the rock stars here, because they know what are some common culprits besides design. Like, you want to protect your design, you don't want to hinder that. What are some other things you can look to that may cause a slow website? Perhaps it's your server just not keeping up with your demands anymore and needs to be replaced. And if you do need to replace it, you need to make sure you're doing it very carefully, right? It's very easy to cause all sorts of irreparable damage to your ranking standings if you're not doing that closely, so work with your web team on that. Maybe you have clunky or just overly coded script that's acquired over the years. I like to call it the Frankenstein effect, right? Especially on old websites. Maybe you've pasted in the arm of this new web template with the body of this old one, and now you're left with this big clunky monster of a website that just doesn't respond to stimuli that's happening around it. This may be time for you to consider updating your website entirely, right? Because that can happen. That can bog down the search engine's ability to load stuff, and it can impact load speed on the user end too, neither of which is ideal for SEO or for your business results. It can be as simple as something as the images you've chosen on your website. A lot of times images are simply too big than they need to be. Maybe you are trying to make an image render in a few 100 kilobyte window, but have accidentally loaded a 9 megabyte file to accomplish that job. That's just unnecessary load time that you can kind of speed up with your web technology team. If you want to follow and see how your website does from a speed perspective, again, just like that mobile-friendly tool, check out Google's Web Developers tool. They'll give you a nice audit of how fast your website is loading and how that compares with the industry you're in at large. H tags is a content hierarchy. So if you're not familiar with what H tags are, they look kind of like this in an ideal world, right? Say you're writing a page about Saturn. Your primary headline, your H1, if you will, should be the planet Saturn, something like that. All of these secondary topics that help support that primary one should be treated as H2s, right? Like planet formation, Saturn's rings, etc. And then if you have further clusters underneath those, you can have H3 tags. So maybe under planet formation, it's Saturn's gases, H of the planet, etc. What they are not is a cosmetic feature. So if you have adopted a web template from something like WordPress, you may find that, oh, there's this really nifty H6 or H7 tag and it comes in blue. That's cool, so I use that. Try to avoid that at all costs because you're really going to start confusing search engines from understanding what kind of hierarchy and content information you're trying to display in a page. Think more like a librarian in this regard and less like a web designer. 404 errors. They're definitely going to happen sometimes, like, right? No one's free of these, and that's okay as long as we're planning for them. We need to prepare for links to break on our website, even especially true for very large websites. We need to monitor for these quickly so we can update and fix them whenever possible. And a good way to do this in the meantime is to create this custom error page. So if somebody lands here, rather than losing that visit that could be potentially become a qualified customer for you, you're giving them some other options to stop them from going effectively. So here's an example of a nicely designed custom 404 error page from Sprout Social. Obviously, if you've ever been on their website, you've seen what they're trying to get you to do is to sign up for a demo. And they give you an opportunity to do that on an error page, which is a pretty clever move. If you're not interested in that and you're not ready to convert from here, and probably aren't, you can just go to the homepage and start your journey over. But the important lesson here is your visit has not been lost, and they are aware they're trying to help get you back on track. Last but not least, don't buy links. This will probably be in every SEO presentation I do until I die, because I still see it happening. It really bums me out. Don't buy links. You have to earn them from reputable sources, no matter what anybody tells you. And there's still so many people out there trying to encourage this activity. There's this idea that the more links you have pointing to your website, the more authoritative you are perceived to be by search engines. And that's certainly true as long as they are reputable. However, if you get caught buying links, right, these meaningless websites out there that just have cheap domains that point links wherever you purchase them to do so, if you're caught doing this, you can get your site banned. It happened to JCPenney in 2011. Very sadly, right before the holiday season was supposed to kick in, and they lost millions of dollars in revenue because of this. Even if something like this doesn't happen to you that's that extreme, you're just wasting your time and your budget. Don't buy links. Go write a blog, make a cool video, do something else with that energy and with that, that budget. Embracing alternative listings. We're getting to the final rounds here. Say we are making sure that we're on the front lines of these technical changes. We need to kind of think not in the short term anymore, but in the long term. Like, where's the internet going? What are people going to want to do in the future here? And we need to think beyond traditional text listings, because our digital presence can appear in a lot more places than you may have guessed. And here are some key examples of some of them. Optimizing YouTube videos for search. Did you know that YouTube is technically the second largest search engine in the world? A lot of times people think that it's Bing. It isn't. It actually is YouTube. And it makes sense, because if you ever have a home project you're working on or something you want to dig into deeper about a new product maybe you purchase, you might go to YouTube to visually demonstrate how you can solve certain problems. On the optimization front, here's a quick list of some things to focus on. A lot of times these YouTube pages look kind of like web pages on your regular website do, where you have a title and a description that you can optimize that provide you an opportunity to link back to somewhere meaningful on your website. There's also unique little things about YouTube like tags, right? Like how you're categorizing a specific video, and closed captioning. This is a great little tool to make sure that you're not neglecting. YouTube will read your video's audio and on its own produce a transcript, these closed captioning files. Just make sure that you're going in there and fixing them up, because sometimes robot language kind of comes through. It might misunderstand you, what you were trying to say, and have little errors. The more you can clean that up, the better chances you're going to have of appearing in YouTube search results, as well as in other places like video results of a Google search. Image results. Did you know that images currently account for about 19% of Google's current results? That's huge, right? And that makes sense because there's sort of this belief, show me, don't tell me, right? Like we want to actually look at what we're talking about. It's way more impactful than sometimes text can be. And some things you can do to focus on appearing in those results. We talked about file sizes earlier, make them as big as they have to be, not bigger. Pay attention to the way you're naming files. Make sure that it's sensible and not just the raw file that comes out of maybe the camera you used, right? So instead of DCM86719.jpg, call it like the rings of Saturn in the orbit system, something like that. That's what you're actually looking at. In case with alt text, in the event your images break or don't render for whatever reason, there are these things that you can put in your HTML called alt text that give you a little description of what would have otherwise been there. It's a great way to make sure that you're establishing context for search engines and users about what the image should be in the case that it doesn't have to render like it's supposed to. Optimizing for voice search. Did you know that it's expected that these are going to account for half or more of all searches within the next year? And if you're not familiar with what voice search is, think like, hey Alexa, okay Google, hey Siri, right? I'm trying to be careful not to say it too loud so my phone doesn't interrupt us here. But you get the idea, right? You're speaking to your device and it's speaking back to you, obviously with an AI-driven device to try to give you the result you're looking for. The quote-unquote position zero, it's often called. Ways you can make an impact here. This is where natural language is huge, right? Because if you have some technical jargon or a big spec script in your page, Google can't read that back to their users. They're not going to do that. They're going to look for quick snippets of information that read naturally, that they can say back to somebody in that sort of conversation between human and robot kind of way. The mobile experience is further hugely important because obviously you're a mobile device for those voice search results, and then making sure that we're providing whatever specific answers we can for a problem, right? If I have, for instance, an identified FAQ, I might make that an H2 tag on my page and have a nice presented answer for that right below it in a simple to read kind of way. All right, so we've talked about the future landscape of the internet. Let's quickly now recap everything we've talked about here today before we move into our Q&A section of the webinar. 5 principles for SEO success. Number 1, you got to earn rankings. You got to make sure that you're at least showing up, and you do that by writing naturally and writing often. Encouraging clicks. Remember, our listings are ads too. Even if we're not paying for those listings, they are still and should be treated like advertisements. Clicks aren't enough anymore though, right? We need to move past that and think about ways we're engaging users to drive actions. If we're doing all those 3 things, what are we doing to continuously improve our technical performance on our website? What are we doing to predict the future of the internet, ways that it's changing, not just what Google might be doing? What are we doing to adapt to changes in our landscape, in our competitors' places? And what are we doing to embrace what the future of search results might look like? Are we adapting with that, or are we trying to be really dead set in the way we think that we know things and not changing with it? How do you know if you're doing it correctly? Here's a couple quick metrics you can focus on. Bounce rate, right? If people reach your web page from search, are they immediately leaving, or are they engaging with your content in a meaningful way? Time on site, are they actually spending as much time on your web page as you think they should, right? Like a blog page, maybe it's a couple of minutes per visit. If it's a contact us page, it should be probably under a minute. Pages per session, are they clicking around like you want them to? And ultimately, goal completions, are we getting them to take whatever designed action we have laid out for them? And above all, ROI, right? There are ways you can tie SEO back to ROI. Look to things like marketing automation and CRMs. It is possible, and you will find if you are doing SEO correctly and tracking it properly, it can absolutely be a ROI driver, if not one of the strongest ones in your digital toolbox. Something not to spend as much effort on, and this is going to maybe cause some ripples in the SEO community, I don't care. Don't worry too much about ranking reports anymore. They're very expensive and they're completely unreliable. That personal experience we talked about earlier, my results should look different for me than they will look for you, depending on where you're located, what your search history might look like. It's just not a repeatable thing. Rankings are way more of a living, dynamic thing than some static, repeatable expectation. And they're also only a stepping stone for true business results. And you can't capture the tens of thousands of keyword variations that users are actually using to find you. So don't waste money. It can easily cost thousands of dollars and will render not very meaningful information for you at the end of the day. You can also get a glimpse into how your keywords are performing currently with Google Search Console for free. So give that a look before you start paying for these really expensive ranking reports. To wrap it up before we move into QA, just remember, there's nothing magical happening here at the end of the day. Google is just a business and their algorithm is just a product. Our goal as marketers, whether you're an SEO marketer, a content creator, whoever it is to understand the user's journey and to simply accommodate them along the way. Thank you all for listening to me ramble for a little bit. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Caitlin to conduct our Q&A.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your insights with the audience this afternoon. Always so much fun to listen to you present. So before we end for today, I did want to move on to some questions that we had from the audience. The first one is from me. She asked, what are ways you can predict a user's intent?
What are some ways you can predict a user's intent? That's a good question. So the first thing to pay attention to with predicting a user's intent is just kind of knowing what your customers think like and how they search, right? This is putting your business first and foremost above everything else. Another thing you can do to establish if maybe the keywords you've identified or the subject you're writing about is matching the intent you want to is just do some spot searches on Google. You can just conduct a couple yourself and see what kind of results it spits back at you. Sometimes you might be surprised and you will find multiple intentions that you didn't want to have represented in the same type of keywords. So just doing spot checks can go a long way.
Great. Our next question is from Kelly regarding SEO influencing behavior behind a login. So what she meant by that was, can we use SEO to influence a customer to use a certain function that they only see when logged into an account? So the destination we want to promote wouldn't be a public-facing page.
You cannot use SEO to influence whatever is behind a wall of any kind. Officially, that's actually in what exists called the dark web. That has like a really negative connotation word. What that really only means is it's content that's not accessible to the community at large. And that represents like 90% of all content on the internet, period. What you can do is influence that wall itself, getting people to that point of entry. So think about, if you have like a portal page maybe for a white paper that's gated that you want people to download, think about writing a really robust description of that white paper to help people reach that gate. You can't influence what's happening behind it officially because you have that blocked off on purpose, but you can maybe get people a little bit more into the door. So
that makes a lot of sense, especially when you want a certain landing page to be searchable. I did want to go back up to the beginning. You kind of already answered this question from Alex, but he wanted to know, is it wise to focus on the monolithic Google search engine? Do they have so much market share that SEO equals Google optimization? And you did touch on this too with YouTube being number 2, but are there any other search engines that you should really pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, there's Bing, there's Yahoo. If you have a good SEO program, you're going to be drawing a lot of traffic from all of them, with obviously the vast majority coming from Google, because that's just kind of how they control the market share right now. They control about 90% of all searches in the United States. But they all, for the most part, look for the same kinds of things. Bing is a little more primitive compared to Google. So Google tends to be sort of the wisdom child that everybody looks to appease, because if you're making it good by them, you are also taking care of the rest of them too. But it's not Google necessarily. I know it sometimes becomes a little synonymous with SEO, what Google thinks, but it's not. To your point, all search engines do matter. You're just going to most likely be drawing more traffic from one than the rest of them combined.
That makes a lot of sense. Going through here as well, we do have another question from Whitney. She asked, don't have a lot of on-site text, how do people find you if you're not already well-established brand like Apple?
Okay, so if you are Apple, obviously you are relying on your reputability largely and your user experience to help determine your rankings. If you are not Apple and you are a smaller company, but you are also maybe additionally keeping your pages a little brief, you might just end up having to buy more traffic to get in the door for a little while, which is not a bad strategy. Truthfully, a lot of media buying can be a really effective way to move the needle on your business results, like purchases. But if you do want to earn those organic rankings and you're not currently doing it with the way things are, you maybe have a less than reputable company name and really thin copy, I would prioritize just starting with the writing first, maybe getting that blog going before you even engage in an SEO program. We're not trying to replace content writing. We're trying to give it that little push of wind. So we can't just throw wind at a boat that doesn't exist. So I would focus on that writing first if you can.
Great. That looks like all of our questions for today. So if we don't have any further ones, Andrew, thank you again so much for presenting to our audience today. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this has been recorded, so we will be making that available soon for download. And we'll send that out to you guys with an email. Also, I will include Andrew's contact information in case you do have any further questions. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks.